So the topic of this video is that Afghanistan, in my analysis, could become a failed state in the next 3 to 5 years, according to my own personal research. And by looking at key components there as far as what's going on in Afghanistan since the Taliban took over in August of 21. You recall that whole fiasco with the plane and a bunch of people trying to get on the plane and those difficult scenes coming out of there. So Taliban came in, former government just basically went into exile and basically left. And Taliban came in and they are looking to set up a government ever since they came in. And as if we speak right now, there is no government, no identified leadership, no clearly identified legislature, a lawmaking body. Yes, they're using the same flag. That doesn't really mean anything. They have a few key problems there. Their number one problem is they're trying to maintain religious Sharia law, right? And create a system that is basically parallel to that. And in reality, there is no such thing. So they could take scripture, in this case, their religious text, and try to govern in today's world, but it's not going to be a very functional system. And that's where their key problem is. There is no one really there to advise them. They're missing key advisors as far as how to set up a government. I don't think they have reached out to anyone in the West as far as providing any nation providing them with key advisors that could help set up a constitution, a parliament, some sort of a governing body that is relatively democratic, with some all-inclusive government. In other words, maybe some of the previous members from the previous government and some of the other different ethnic groups there. So they're struggling tremendously with that. How to set up a government with the religious Sharia law, and one that works with or is recognized by the rest of the world in the international community. So this is where their core problem is, right? How to set up that government. And currently they're struggling with that because it really is not a very successful model when you're trying to keep laws that were basically in society 1400 years ago, and you're trying to implement those rules in the 21st century. Is a very difficult task, and I'm sure they're trying very hard, but it is not something that's sustainable as far as governance is concerned. Creating a separate constitution, that creates a dilemma. If you create a separate constitution, well, what does that include? It's not like you can model yourself after the United States and say, okay, freedom of rights, freedom of religion, freedom to bear arms, freedom to do this, freedom to do that. They are not going to do that because going by the strict Sharia law prevents them from trying to come up with a separate constitution that parallels it and is still allowing certain freedoms. so they can cover that human rights aspect of it. Because the human rights is a big issue to everyone, whether they're neighboring countries like Tajikistan up in the northern part of Afghanistan is complaining about a specific area there where the Taliban is creating human rights violations, and so they're not wanting to recognize the Taliban government. I'm talking about the Tajikistan government is not wanting to recognize them. United States President Biden also said we have a long ways before we can recognize the Taliban as the real government or the de facto government. So they're trying. When you listen to their foreign ministry, all the words coming out of the foreign ministry, the spokesperson, oftentimes spokesperson are basically a mouthpiece, and not to devalue their foreign ministry, but they're a spokesperson and they have their talking points. So the person there is pretty knowledgeable. He has Western education, and he does understand how the international community is, and has some ideas of what the international system is, and how the world actually functions. So as far as he's concerned, he's trying, but he still has to deal with the key Taliban leadership that is preventing him from saying things that possibly the EU, the West, would recognize as something stable. So that's where their dilemma is. And it is not an easy task to go from war mode to governance. Extremely difficult. And especially when you are missing key advisors, and those advisors that could help you set up a government that is not just functioning for within the borders of Afghanistan, but is also reaching out to the international community and saying things that the international community would see as attractive, to say it in plain language. It's all their lingo right now. Their talking points are simply, we need help, we need aid, we don't want charity, we need help, but we are not going to recognize human rights violations. We're not going to recognize the fact that women cannot educate, not even on a secondary level. They can't go to school, they can't hold a job. They're back in basically being, women are basically being, they're going back to becoming invisible again. And they may be trying. I give them that benefit of the doubt when I listen to the foreign ministry. According to him, the spokesperson, I believe his name is Abdul Khahar Balki. I think that's what his name is. And you could tell he's somewhat educated, has some Western education to him. He does understand some basics and how to communicate with the West, but that's exactly why he was put in that position. But he's not the person that has any authority. So he's just a mouthpiece, and we understand that he's a spokesperson. But according to him, Balki, he says the same points over and over again, that yes, we're trying, we're addressing, we have no human rights violations here, we're trying to address this, or trying to address that. It's all deny. And the very first thing that he would say is, we need our money released. We need our $10 billion that's frozen in the United States. I believe it's 7 to 10 billion is what's frozen in the United States. So they want that money in order to set up a government. But here's the problem. If the West releases that money and they continue on the path that they're on with the human rights violations, I don't feel that the West should release that funds at this point till at least there is some signs of changes there. That way, because we're at that point dealing with human beings being violated in many different ways. So whether it's just basic freedom of speech or just freedom to be themselves. There are long ways from dealing with things like LGBT community and all that. Long ways. They would not even come close to recognizing that. At this point, the West would like them to recognize some basic rights as far as women's rights, being able for the women to educate themselves and be able to work. You land in Kabul airport, according to the journalist, you can't see any women there. There's no women working. And when you ask the foreign ministry, they say, well, most of our men are unemployed, so how are we going to employ? Which is very logical. Why don't you let some women out in the front lines, in the front, so people can see that you are a normal functioning society, and yes, you adhere to certain. They could still be in a hijab and be working. They do not have to be completely veiled. Now, they're wanting to go back to the culture, which is a cultural thing, by the way, to put the women in veils. And there is many countries like their neighbor, Pakistan. You could go there and women walk around in hijab, without a hijab, in full burqa. So it's not like there couldn't be a medium there, but they're wanting to continue on that path that they were on 20 some odd years ago when they were trying to gain power at that point. So, and it never worked for them. And it's not going to work now or in the future, because that is not what the world wants to see. So if they feel, the Taliban feel like, well, this is our nation and we have the right to exist, we have the right to our sovereignty. Yes, you do, but you do not have the right to commit human rights violations. Human beings are human beings, regardless of where they live. And this is clearly lacking in their understanding that we have to address the human rights violations, which their own neighbors are complaining about. Iran is complaining about that because they have some of their Shia, the Shia is a minority in Afghanistan, in the southern part of Afghanistan, the Hazara area, where there's some Shia, and they have one individual that's somewhat being included in their governing body. They don't have a legislature yet. Right now, there is no women in their government or the government that's trying to form. I have yet to see any. And if they do have them, they need to clearly identify them. They're not wanting to do that. So these are the things that I would address if I was guiding the Taliban leadership there. We don't know who they are. There are just few men there that are taking some leadership positions, but they clearly do not understand how the international system works. They have no idea. And yes, their spokesperson is knowledgeable in the sense where he understands what the West is looking for, but he's a mouthpiece. He can't do anything past just speaking certain talking points which are given to him. So that said, within 3 to 5 years, I predict a complete collapse of Afghanistan. Why? Because they're unable to sustain on this path that they're on. Right now, 95% of Afghanistan is looking to starve. And the world community the World Food Program is saying exactly that 95% are about to starve. So we need to, possibly we could release, maybe the Biden administration could release a small portion of that money, of the 10 billion, to see where the Taliban government or the governing body takes that, what direction they take after that. So it's difficult to see at this point, clearly see what their direction could be, except what they're stating clearly is that we would like to govern ourselves with the Sharia law, which is a very difficult thing when you are dealing with the international community, and that is something that they failed to understand in the past. Hopefully they will understand it now. Within the next few years, maybe a year or 2 years, they would try to create a body of governance there, a legislature, possibly a constitution. I don't even know if that's possible for the Taliban leadership there. So we have yet to see these things, but my prediction is based on the pathway, the road that they're on, the pathway they're on, why I feel very strongly in my analysis that Taliban is going to be a failed state in the next 3 to 5 years. And I think I would leave it at that for now and try to follow up on it and see if there's anything else I could report on the Afghan situation. But right now it looks pretty grim. And anyways, we'll leave it at that and then try to update everyone on what happens by the time the year comes up, because in August it'll be a year for the Taliban taking over. So we'll leave it at that for now.